Thank you, Lucy, for joining us this afternoon in Hong Kong and your morning.
Thank you for having me. I'm absolutely delighted to be with you all.
So I'm going to introduce you briefly and then we'll get into some of our questions. You are an independent arbitrator specializing in commercial and investment arbitration. Over 20 years experience in the field, have served as a counsel and arbitrator in over 60 arbitrations, qualified in England and Wales, as well as in Texas. And importantly for our discussion today, you are the founder of the Campaign for Greener Arbitrations. And that is an initiative to reduce the environmental footprint of the work that we do. And you won, for these efforts, you won the 2020 GAR Prize for Best Development. So congratulations. Before we get started, Lucy, I wanted to run a poll here for everyone in the room and online. The question is this: a large arbitration, so approximately 30 to 50 million US dollars, let's say, would require around how many trees to offset its carbon impact? Let's see how we go in that. The options: 200 trees, 2,000 trees, 20,000 trees, or 200,000 trees. Okay. So we have a tie. 33% say 2,000 or 20,000. So we'll find out soon how big the forest has to be to cover one of these big international arbitrations. But can I turn to you, Lucy, to help us with that question and to also talk to us a bit about the impact that you've found through your work and your studies of international arbitration? What is the environmental impact?
Absolutely. And let me put the audience and everyone out of their misery first. So it is 20,000 trees we calculated that were needed to offset one major international arbitration. And that, to put that in context, is about the equivalent of all the trees in Central Park. So quite staggering, because really when I started talking about this issue, I knew that in order to convince my sort of skeptical, I will say lawyers tend to be skeptical, slightly conservative, of the importance of acting to reduce our environmental footprint, I had to do an environmental impact analysis. And so with the great help of a team from Deckert, we took a case study and looked into every single aspect of the international arbitration. We looked at flights, we looked at printing, we looked at motorbike couriers, we looked at domestic, and we looked at international travel. And our headline figure is the number about the trees, but obviously we have some very useful data in terms of breaking down each individual component and seeing where the real issues lie. And we found, unsurprisingly, that travel was the largest, by far, largest component of that. And travel, international travel, and certainly business class travel is a real issue. And then the smaller component of it is things like printing, and that's always something that is easier to address, perhaps.
And so can you tell us, Lucy, in terms of responding to the impact that we have on the environment, what are the most effective steps that we can all take in our practice?
Well, I mean, it's extraordinary to be talking to you all from London today and to having such a great experience and to have sat through the conference today and enjoyed it from my home office here in London. I mean, the biggest thing we can do is ask every time. I always say, question the need to fly. Do we really have to get on a plane? And, you know, if we can take one positive thing out of the global pandemic, it is the fact that as a community, I think we have been extraordinary in the way that we have pivoted to online interactions such as this one. And so even before we were all forced to really stay at home to a greater or lesser extent, we should have been thinking more about whether we really needed to fly, say, 5 lawyers across the Atlantic to interview one witness, and to think about, could we bring the witness to the lawyers, to think about, could we have done this through video conferencing software. And as I say, I think that we have an opportunity here to build on what we've learned as a result of the pandemic. But so to answer your question, fly less and then print less. Those are our real key messages.
And Lucy, have you started to see attitudes change, or more awareness around this topic in your practice or in the field, or we still have a ways to go?
I think we have a long way to go. I think we were very behind in our attitudes to the environment. I always say we had talked a lot about arbitrating climate change disputes. We had not talked about our personal responsibility to reduce our environmental footprint. And that's the conversation we really need to have. But I would also say it needs to be more than just a conversation. In our field, we are very good at talking about things, and respectfully, we may not be quite as good at taking concrete actions to change. And we've seen that, I've seen that in the last sort of 10 years or so. In talking first about, increasing efficiency in arbitrations, reducing time and costs. We seem to be talking about that for a long time, and we haven't necessarily made sufficient steps in that area. Then we talked about diversity a lot. There has been some concrete change there, but frankly, we don't have time when we start talking about climate change to spend the next 5 years discussing it. We need to really see people changing their behaviors. And I think the key is, I think we are all bad at sort of saying we're going to be environmentally responsible in our personal lives, but then when we walk into the office, law firm, chambers, wherever we are, we sort of put that to one side and think, well, it's somebody else's problem now. And much of what we are doing at the Campaign for Greener Arbitrations is trying to make it very clear that everyone has to play their part in terms of tackling this emergency, because it is an emergency.
And so we've seen obviously a lot of change over this year with COVID-19 and what it's forced us to do and adjust in terms of how we run our cases. And there have been a lot of benefits to that in terms of cost savings. Do you think that that's one way that will really shift behavior with respect to clients and users, like having those conversations around more environmentally friendly procedures and how we work in terms of lowering the number of flights, not sending as many associates across the world for a hearing or for witness interviewing and so forth, and also with respect to document production and shifting more to using online document repository systems and online interactions? Do you think that that's a critical part of the conversation in terms of bringing people over the line where maybe they wouldn't otherwise move, that it's a cost saver?
Yes, and I think that, your point is a great one, Sarah, and there isn't just a strong moral imperative to do something. There's actually a very compelling business case to arbitrate in a greener way. And part of our analysis, in part of our analysis, we looked at the financial impact of running an arbitration in a greener way. And it was fairly simple. The study that we ran was simply take one less flight at every stage of the arbitration and don't print the bundles. And that resulted, just those two changes resulted in a reduction in disbursements of 40%. And I think it's extremely clear that there's going to be a real squeeze on legal spend following the pandemic. And this is a way that I think clients can certainly get on board, because certainly our data shows that it is cheaper to run your arbitrations less wastefully, if I can put it like that.
Yeah, and I know that, one of the challenges we have is as lawyers, we're always too busy. We're always too busy for ourselves. And so I'd be interested if you talked a little bit about what your campaign is doing in terms of providing practitioners with the tools that they can then take away and implement in their cases, for example, draft procedural text that might be useful.
Yes, and I mean, Sarah, as you know, this Green Pledge started as very much a personal pledge by me. I'd spoken at London International Disputes Week on technology and arbitration, and as I was researching for that, I was thinking, why are we not using more of this technology in our practices? And that led me to sort of say, you know, I pledge that I will run my arbitrations in an environmentally friendly way, and I will encourage counsel appearing before me to do so. But it was very clear that that worked for arbitrators, but it didn't really work for the wider community. And so the pledge sort of grew into the campaign, as it were. And I've brought together a steering committee, excuse me, I brought together a steering committee of representatives from every single part of the arbitration process. And we're working on protocols, so best practices as to for every single person involved in arbitration as to how you can reduce your footprint.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, can I just see if there are any questions from the floor for Lucy while we have her on the line? No, okay. Well, wonderful. Thank you very much, Lucy, for your time. It's been a real pleasure to hear from you. And I would just say to everyone who's watching and here in the room to watch this space. Obviously, it's a critical issue for all of us, and we can contribute through our professional work. Thank you very much, Lucy.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you for your support.